Hello, good people of the world. My name is Bianchi, and today we're gonna make weird sounds like this, this, and even this. Let me ask you a question. Do any of the sounds that you just heard sound old, outdated, or obsolete? If the answer is yes, you may close the video now. On the other hand, if you don't think so, you may be surprised by knowing that most of them are rooted in synthesizers that came out as 60 years ago, or use synthesis methods that were discovered and implemented in the past century. I've always been fascinated by the idea of taking sounds and concepts from the past and trying to modernize them. I think that if you don't add a modern twist to ideas from the past, you're just bragging on something that you already know just for the sake of nostalgia. There are three main ways that we can take to achieve this updating process. All of them build towards the concept of cross-synthesis and can fall under the head of the so-called time machine method. So we can start from the old stuff and try to apply modern synthesis techniques to old hardware or software. On the other hand, we can take sounds from old machines and bring them into new synthesizers, using their sound design capabilities to spark new life into what may sound vintage, or we can cross in between them. But let's go in order and let's start from the old shit. We can start with this little guy here, the Mini Moog from 1970. This little fella is really simple. It just has 3 oscillators, a mixer, one filter with its dedicated envelope, another envelope for loudness, and you're pretty much done. But the capabilities of this thing are really unique and were really far ahead for its time. We'll try to apply the concept of audio rate modulation to a synthesizer that was clearly not made for it, but is capable of doing it. This is the sound that we're going to create. Super bubbly. So the important thing here is using the third oscillator as a modulation source for both the other two oscillators and the filter's cutoff frequency. As you can see from the modulation mix here, we have mostly the third oscillator modulating those two destinations, and a tad bit of noise is not all the way down. And we have the main oscillator with an 8-foot range playing a saw wave, and the second oscillator an octave lower that is playing a square wave, just to give it more beef. The third one, again, is a saw wave and is being used as a modulation source. If we set it all the way down, you're going to be able to hear the movement that this LFO basically is providing. But we want it to sound really bubbly, so we put it all the way up to the 8-foot range. All 3 oscillators are going out to the amp, but realistically you're hearing just the main 2 because this one is really low. Importantly, the filter's resonance is really high so that it can self-oscillate and basically create another oscillator that is moving with the other 2, modulated by the third one. If you bring this value down, it loses much of the bite. Also, I'm using the soft clipper provided by Arturia, and afterwards I am clipping again and limiting the sound. Let's hear the sound in context. For our next sound, we're going to use the Buchla easel from 1973, a pretty weird instrument, and we're going to try to create an exponential rhythm with it. Basically a rhythm that goes from a really low speed to a really high one, or the other way around, creating some sort of folding sound that you can hear throughout IDM music. This sounds like this. The easel is a semi-modular synthesizer, so you had to plug in different cables to different destinations to let them modulate what you want. Basically, everything that is orange is referring to the envelope generator that we're going to use as a modulation source. It's set to self, so it's basically a loop. As we bring the decay down, we're gonna achieve that folding typical of exponential rhythms. You're not gonna see it update here, but I have mapped it to our macro here. So when I move the rate down, this decay is gonna go all the way down and fold our sound. So what are we modulating with this envelope generator? Mainly the level of these two amps, respectively, our main oscillator sound and our noise sound. We can hear them separately like this. We're also modulating the pitch and the timbre of our oscillator. And what this last control does is basically adding, in this case, a square wave to our overall sound. Without it, and with it, much more friction. Afterwards, in this big group here, I just put an envelope MIDI to control the envelope mode, because if you let it self-oscillate continuously, you're not going to be able to stop the sound when you remove your hand from the keyboard. This way I can just trigger it with my keyboard, and when I leave the key, it's going to stop. I put a saturator in wave shaper mode to add more grit to the sound, and I'm controlling it with this grain knob. Also, I have this spread group here that splits the sound into left and right and puts different saturators and phaser flangers in the two parts in order for the sound to become larger in the stereo field. Also note that these phasers are at 0% because I just want notch filters in between our sound in different positions to create different stereo images in left and right, but I don't want them to move. Then I added corpus to add a more organic sound to our exponential rhythm, and I'm controlling it with this short knob. 3 OTTs in a row to bring out some artifacts. And then, as usual, saturation and limiting. Let's hear the sound in context. For next sound, we're gonna bring out the granddaddy of all modern music, that is the Fairlight CMI from 1979. This thing is capable of doing so much stuff. It's a sampler, it's an additive synthesizer. Arturia has also inserted a spectral synth in it, as if it wasn't enough. We're gonna use it to do stuff that it's not supposed to do, trying to replicate the warp modes that we are all familiar with thanks to Serum, and trying to combine them in unexpected ways. So let's hear how a triangle wave sounds through a 1979 vintage synthesizer. That sounds clippy as fuck, but also pretty interesting, right? You have all of them here. And the cool thing is that you can even combine them in different ways to create different sounds. You can also hear that crispy beat reduction sound on the top of it. So to import the sounds into the Fairlight, I just took Serum. Let's start from the sine wave. I just put the randomization of the phase to 0 and set an LFO a bar long to control the different word mode that I wanted. Let's start from band plus minus. And I just recorded 1 bar of the sine wave going from low to high. I already had it here inside my user table, and as you can see, it works. Then I just took my Fairlight and I searched for that wave table into Mac, Library, Audio, Presets, Xfer Records, Serum Presets, Tables. And on your custom ones or user, you're going to find all the ones that you saved. I imported my sine band, and from the edit tab, I just made sure that it could find the actual sample rate to play it. And we can check it out right now. If we try to move inside of it by setting our sample start and loop start to a macro and our loop length all the way down to one sample, also, what you can do is go to your edit page and convert your sample into an actual synthesized wave by clicking this analyze button. I have already done that. If I go back into my control page and click time synth, now I have a resynthesized version of that same wave, and I can further edit it by removing or adding different harmonics, and it sounds quite different from the other wave. Also, what I can do, and that is really dope, I can change the wave of the partials that compound that sound. So usually those are sine waves, but I can decide that I want slow waves as my partials. How cool is that? And if I move it, let's see if I add like 4 of them together and I decide that all of them are so waves. Super weird respaces. Let's hear these sounds in context. We're going to use the Fairlight again to create grain synthesis by using its sampling capabilities. So I put a simple burst sample into it, and I modulated the start of the sample and of its loop via these functions that are basically LFOs with random rates. And all of them are different for the main burst sound and its left and right layer. Also I have this control fader that diodes in the level of those two left and right layers. So this is just our main one. And this is with those two added. Cool thing is that you can do that using every sample that you want. For example, here I use an old pad from a Junior synthesizer. And this time I've also added octave range. So if I fade them in slowly, you're going to hear a bright texture on the top end of this sound. Let's hear this sound in context. So let's pass on to the new shit. So this time we're gonna use modern day instrument and transform old synthesizer sounds into something completely new. We're gonna do that in different ways by applying new synthesizing methods to those sounds and trying to import the actual sounds or libraries from old synthesizers into the new environment of our softwares. So what do I mean when I say transforming old sounds? Well, brace yourself, because what you're about to hear is sound design madness using Serum 2, but its main ingredients are gonna be waves from the old Roland Jupiter. Let's hear how it sounds. So what the hell was that? Well, basically, I'm just taking wavetables from old hardware, or in this case, software, because I'm taking them from Arturia's version of them. But I'm basically morphing in between the different waves of the Jupiter. So as you can see, if I remove smooth interpolation, we're going from sine to some sort of pulse wave, to a square wave, to a saw wave. With smooth interpolation, they glide one in between the other. And I'm modulating it, and also a bunch of other stuff, with these 4 LFOs. Also, I have a second oscillator that is the same wave with 7 unison voices in it. Also, it's the tune and blend between those voices modulated by these LFOs. This oscillator is getting phase distortion by the first one, and the first one is getting frequency modulated by the second one. Stuff that wasn't possible into the original Juno. I also have a direct sub that flutters with the LFO. This main oscillator is going through a diffuser filter, which is basically an emulation of disperser by kilohertz, and then into a Moog-type ladder filter. Afterwards, I am distorting the shit out of it with a stompbox distortion. I'm adding a bit of room, I am multiband compressing it, EQing it to remove some mud and adding a bit of top end, and then limiting at the end. I am controlling the speed of these LFOs through this macro here, and the overall sound, as you can hear, has something to do with the old vintage sound of the Jupiter, but is completely mangled. You can also go more vintage with it. I scored an horror movie directed by me, actually, last year, and I used waves from the Sequential Prophet to recreate the sounds that John Carpenter uses in his films like Halloween, Escape from New York, and yada yada. So this sounds like this. Michael Myers is coming to get you. Just to show you how many sounds you can make out of the same ingredients, this is the same saw wave of the Prophet fed into Ghost, which is an amazing synthesizer that no one speaks about enough. And here you have some really gritty Reese bass. Let's hear all this stuff in context.
So dark, so much blood. Death, suffering. They will kill us all.
Now we'll try to emulate one of my favorite machines created by Wolfgang Perm in 1981, and that is the PPG Wave 2. Maybe the first wavetable synthesizer in history, and clearly one that had an amazing impact on music industry in general. You can hear this synthesizer all over the discography of artists like Depeche Mode, Tangerine Dream, Gary Newman, Tears for Fears, and many, many more. So here I have an emulation of the PPG by Waldorf. This is a sound from the original library of the synthesizer, and it has that clear grit in the high end that you're gonna hear right now. The unique sound of this instrument is given by the really high sample rate and the really low bit depth of its wavetables. The PPG manual cites around 300 kilohertz of sample rate. This contributes to an effect called imaging, where the whole spectrum of the sound is represented in the high end and moves spectrally in and out of the texture. To recreate this effect, I use Serum 2, and this is the result. So I started from a wavetable where I had different harmonics of a sine wave because it was similar to the original sound. Then I edited it, reduced the number of frames just to 16, just to degrade the sound in a similar way to what the original hardware does. Also, to create the typical stepping of an 8-bit wavetable, I created a pretty stepped LFO that I attached to different parameters. This controls the wavetable position of this oscillator and the other two, as well as the warping modes and some sync. Then what I did was copying the first oscillator, you can do it from here, and pasted it into the second one. You can further edit the wavetable with different processes. What I did here was resizing the table to be double in order for these 16 frames to be just 8, because I wanted the whole wavetable to be shrink down and to have multiple frames in just one. Because if you think about it, if you have the whole spectrum in the high range, it means that you have the whole wavetable running at a really high rate in the upper top band of your sound. So I resizes the table to be double, and this is the result. You have the same thing, but shrink down. Then I expanded the sound again by copying the second oscillators into the third one and modifying some parameters like the octave, the unison, and attaching different parameters to different LFOs. To create some phasing and give the sound more interest, I run all the oscillators through a diffuser filter. Then the higher oscillators are being sent into this first bus, where you have two comb filters, creating a stereo effect, a dimension expander, and an equalizer that just cuts off the lows and boosts slightly the highs. Then everything runs together inside this main effect section, where you have again a sample hole filter degrading the sound and a downsample distortion for the same purpose. Two comb filters whose cutoff frequencies are being modulated by symmetrical LFOs to create the phasing effect that you can clearly hear in the high range of the real instrument. A multiband compressor squashing the sound together, an EQ, and at the end an SCM filter just to shape the sound more if I want. Let's hear it in context. Finally, we've reached the part of the video where I speak to you about a new concept, which is not really new, but I don't see it used that often. This idea is called cross-synthesis, and basically it's the idea of using the unique features of one instrument to create a sound, and then importing that sound into another instrument, whose unique features you're going to use to further shape that sound, and you can do that as many times as you want, and the more you do it, the more that sound is going to become interesting and weird and really great. So we're going to start by creating one sound with the Prophet. Here we have a simple saw wave. And we're going to shape it more. Let's use the LFO at a really high rate to control the pulse width of the first oscillator that we're going to set to square wave. Also, we're going to blend it with a bit of noise modulation. We are also going to use oscillator B to control the filter cutoff. We're also going to turn the sync on and add just a tiny bit of noise. And we are going to increase the pitch bend range to 12 semitones. And this is going to be our first sound. We're going to resample it into audio. And there you have it right here. We are going to consolidate it. And now we can import it into Serum. Just drag it into the first oscillator. Now we know that the note that we played was an E1. I can remove the first 6 frames of this wavetable because it's just silent. And I can edit this more, normalizing each. Shift the whole wavetable horizontally to the zero crossing. And we can hear what it sounds like. And by turning on smooth interpolation, we can hear how it sounds. What we can do to make it sound less haptic is blurring the spectra of the wavetable. And what it's going to do is trying to morph spectrally the different frames one into the other. I can also reduce this to half the length and sorting them by spectrum. You know what, I'm going to reduce them again because I want less movement. There you go. Now we can play with it. For example, we can apply different morphing modes to this wavetable. Or a bit of unison, why not? We'll try to modulate the first oscillator by using the wave shapes of another vintage instrument like the CS80. We'll use its square wave to phase distort the first oscillator. Yeah. We'll add an AMS filter to create some random filter movement. And also, why not a second filter? We're going to use the good old diffuser filter, which is just kilohertz disperser. We're gonna move it again with an LFO just to create some phasing. And now we're going to fuck the sound up more with some effects. We can use the new overdrive distortion and we can stack up to 16 of them, but we're just going to use, let's say, 5. We're going to convert the bass to mono, everything down, let's say, 100 Hz, just to have a bit more control over it. And now we're going to compress everything together with a multiband compressor, except for the bass. We don't want that compressed. And by increasing the pitch bend range to 12 semitones, we can do some fun pitch bend stuff like this. We can fuck with the sound even more, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I think I'm going to bring this to audio. There you have it, a nice chunky mud pie. Have we finished with this? Absolutely not. I'm going to use this new friend of mine, the MPC 2000. When I found out that someone had actually made a VST version of the MPC, especially this one, which was used by so many artists that I love, like J Dilla, MF Doom, Q-Tip, and many, many more, I was stunned. And I was even more stunned when I found out that this shit is free. And free is better than paid. So let's see how you can use it. On the surface, this is just simpler, right? Actually, it No, it's much more than a simple sampler. So we're going to import our MudPy. Because the virtual MPC does not support compressed WAV files, what you need to do is actually exporting this sound anywhere on your computer, and now you can import it here, and there you have it. Now you can edit the sound, and the first thing I do is cropping it to remove all the unused space that you have at the start and the end like this. Then you can normalize it, and there you have your sound. Now what you can do from the trim menu, going to the zone tab, slice the sound, so you're going to have this big MudPy divided into these 16 pads. And we can, again, trim the whole thing as we like. For example, we can take this and take just that end glitch. Yeah, and why not normalizing it and time stretch it to like double the length. So now we have it here as a new sound. Pretty interesting. And check this out, this is really dope. You can convert this sound and reduce its sample rate, creating that really vintage lo-fi MPC sound. We're going to make it 23-ish hertz and 12 bits with low quality. Then I have it here as a new sound. You can also tune the different sounds up or down, filter them, and make them mono. Now I'm going to create a tune using these slices, and we're gonna have fun with it. So I hope you like the idea of going back and forth in time and breathing new life into these instruments. Remember, nothing is old or outdated if it still matters to someone. That was all for today. Cheers. See you next time. Bye.